All righty. Could I get you to all stand up for a moment? Reach up just as high as you can. Reach down just as low as you can. Stand straight up. Look off to stage left at the man in the blue shirt and say, "Hey, Mike." Come on up, Mike Rutherford. Everyone have a seat and welcome Mike Rutherford to the stage, please. Mike has been involved in SAM work with us since way back in the study phase, and I always say the same thing about him in introducing him. I always say, the best adult professional developer I've ever met. There's no one I've gotten to work with over time, including all of the friends I have with Top 20 Training and other groups, John Antonetti. I love them all, but no one has consistently been able to do professional development with principals specifically as effectively as Mike Rutherford. So Mike, thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you,
Mike
Mark.
Rutherford.
Yeah, thanks very much. I appreciate it. Thanks. Good afternoon, everyone. And Mark, thank you for the kind introduction and welcome. Thanks for having me back at the 15th Annual SAMS Conference. This is a great occasion. No one puts on a conference like you guys, Mark. The pretzels and chocolate, that was unexpected. Don't eat them all. I'd like to have one after. I thought maybe not a good idea to have one right before our session. So thanks for coming and thanks for staying around. Gosh, this is prime time, isn't it? 3:30 till 4:30 in the afternoon, right before an exciting boat ride, after having had lots of snacks and a great lunch. I mean, we are teed up for an amazing afternoon, for sure. I think there's some research somewhere that says this is the prime time for adult learning. 3:30-ish to 4:45-ish in the afternoon on the first full day of the conference with lots of party and stuff coming up. So thank you, Mark, for the great billing. And to make things even more interesting, I want you to know that the topic that I've selected for us for this afternoon is very technical and kind of geeky and nerdy. We're just going to get into some of the science of classroom observations. We're going to talk about some of the basics of that, some of the angles and some of the visual cues, and we're just going to work on our ability. So it won't be motivational. I think you're already motivated. It won't be inspirational. I know, I've seen you around, and I know many of you, you're already plenty well inspired. I hope what you'll find is that it's a good close to the day. It's practical. It's aspirational. It helps us in our ability to go from good to great as we support and develop teachers. And that's really at the core mission of SAMS. And it's at the core mission of you and your personal mission as well. So thank you. Thanks for being here, and thanks for the opportunity. We're going to talk a little bit this afternoon about developing our vision in classroom observations. So this is something that is endemic to our work. We want to develop teachers. We want to give teachers feedback and coaching. We want to be instructional leaders. As SAMs, we want to help our principals fulfill this mighty role. We want to do our best in that area. And I guess what I'd like to suggest is that starts with having sharp vision so that when we go into classrooms, we have the ability to spot leverage points that will help teachers develop on behalf of students. And so we'll just, if you'll join me with just getting into some of the science of that, I think that'll be a fun way to close out the day. I want to make a little case for why this is important. So these 3 bits of what I would call a logic model, the rationale, the why spend some time late in the afternoon working on the science of observing classrooms. So here's the case. Number 1, skillful teaching is the prime mover of student success. We know, the evidence is clear, that many variables impact student success at your schools. There is a single variable, however, that for the past 34 straight years has been at the top of the effect size list. And that is the quality and the skillfulness of the teaching that students receive. So skillful teaching isn't just one of the things that promotes student success, it's the big animal. It's hard for me to understand how a school could ever substantially increase success for students without paying attention to the number one highest effect size variable that moves that success. All right, let's back up one logic point behind that. Practice with feedback is the prime mover of skillful teaching. How do teachers become ever more skillful? How is it that some of the teachers that you serve and that you lead with have over the years become so skillful, so effective, even magical at times? How did that happen? Teaching is the kind of a career that's based on skills. It's a lot like playing the piano or riding a skateboard. You get better at it by actually practicing, and practicing teaching is accelerated by getting good quality feedback and coaching. So skillful teaching is the prime mover of student success, and practicing with feedback is the prime mover of building skillfulness in the classroom. Third of three, skillful observation is the prime mover of effective feedback. We would struggle, I think, to give teachers quality feedback on things we can't see, on issues that we aren't able to recognize. So our ability to go into classrooms, not as the teacher, but as the teacher supporter, the teacher developer, and see and identify leverage points in the system of that classroom where a little bit of effective feedback and coaching can cause a teacher's skillfulness to jump to the direct benefit of student success. So rather than work on this afternoon the actual feedback skills or how to talk to teachers or what to say to them or what not to say to them or what to say after you've said something that you shouldn't have said, let's work on the part that comes before that. The observation time. As we walk into classrooms, I want you to know this is not an introductory session on this. This fully assumes that you are experienced and effective already at classroom observations. We're going to work on some good to great principles. I'm going to share just some things and ask you to consider adopting them and which ones resonate with you. I'm going to ask you to add some things to the add some things to the list as well. Let's do this. I'd like to ask you to create a little bit of a discussion group, and I'd like for you to have a standing discussion group for some of the principles of effective classroom observation. Let's just take 30 seconds and do it. And here are the rules. You can be in a group of 3, 4, 5, or 6, right? Pretty flexible. 7's too many, 2's a little awkward. 3, 4, 5, and 6. Let's make sure nobody feels left out. And I want your group, your discussion group, to be a standing group. So let's just say that this table right here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, you could be a group all in yourself because you got 6 people at your group. Now, if someone has been misbehaving and you'd sort of like to ostracize them, I think that would have been okay, except for the last presentation, frowned on that. I think that's called belittlement, right? So we don't want that to happen. When you guys are in your group, I'd like for you to stand up, maybe come over here a little bit. Let's do a Dr. Fauci approved spacing, right? So that we're not all bunched up. We've got a little bit of room in between each person, but you've got 3, 4, 5, 6 people in a group. When I say go, which I'm going to do in about 15 seconds, just find your group, make sure no one's left out, and let's just take 60 seconds. And what I'd like for you to share with the 3, 4, 5, or 6 people in your group is this. What's one of your best tips for classroom observation? If a brand new principal came to you and said, I want to get better at this, give me a tip. Not something too fancy, just something basic. Give me a good tip to start my career as an effective observer of teachers and teaching. What would that be? Let's start with that. So you're going to be 3, 4, 5, and 6. Each person's going to check in real quickly and say, here's a tip I would give a new principal about classroom observations. That'll take just a couple of minutes, and then we'll start in with the rest of the presentation. Ready? Go. Good work, keep it up. Tips for new principals, something from your toolbox that works well for you. Hey, thanks everyone. Good work. Find a good spot to interrupt your conversation. Now note where you are and note who you're with, because I am going to ask you to come back to this same place and meet with these same people a couple of times throughout this afternoon's presentation. So say bye-bye team and back to your tables, and remember your team and your spot. Excellent. So the way I think I'd like to structure this is to just continue with what you've started. Let's look at some tips, some ideas, some practical suggestions on how to be an ever better classroom observer. I'm going to call these success principles, right? PLES. A principle, PLE, is better than a suggestion, but it's not yet a law. So these aren't the laws of classroom observation. They're principles of effective classroom observation. And I'd like to share several of them with you. And I know this sounds a little odd, but I'd really encourage you just to listen and take minimal notes. If you're the type of person that likes to have the text for further study, this is my Twitter address, and all the things we're going to talk about this afternoon, I just put up so that you could download them if you wanted to, if you just hit that site. But I'd really like to ask you to, this afternoon, if you wanted to take a note or two, help yourself, but just listen. And don't worry much about remembering them all. We can find our way back to the principles, but to deeply consider each one. Here's number one. As a classroom observer, I really believe we do well to practice this concept called intellectual humility. Let's recognize that we are not skillful enough to spot every great thing that a teacher does. We are simply, our brain and our eyes and our optic nerve and our prefrontal cortex are just not up to the job of seeing everything that happens in a classroom. And so, this notion of intellectual humility is linked to expertise. Studies that show what is it that makes the difference between an expert in something and a novice. And those studies key in on this term, intellectual humility. Experts know how much they don't know. And that's what makes them know a lot. So I think, as a practical matter, I feel like I do better as an observer when right before I walk into the classroom, I talk some humility to myself. Pay attention, Mike. There are going to be things to see in here. If you're not paying sharp attention, you'll miss them. You're going to miss them anyway. You'll hopefully be able to see just a small part of what you might be able to share back with the teacher. Practice this concept of knowing that we are on sacred ground in these classrooms, and we're looking through just a tiny porthole into what is possibly there, and to be humble about really what I would consider, brain research has come a long way, but it's still pretty magical how young human beings go to school and learn and grow and develop and are able to be as successful as they are. Let's be humble and admit we still do not understand exactly how that happens. And we, as administrators, don't have an answer for everything a teacher could or should do in a classroom. So a bit of intellectual humility, I think, is a good idea. John Dewey has the quote that I always like to think about for myself. We don't learn from experience. We learn from processing our experience. So if you're a school principal and you've been one for several years, you have some experience. But Dewey and others would say, just having experiences doesn't really make you more knowledgeable. It's thinking about, it's processing, it's thinking about these experiences. The National Highway Traffic Safety Administration keeps data on this. They know when you're the safest driver. And it's not when you've had more years behind the wheel. In fact, there's hardly any difference in the safety record of a 10-year driver versus a 25-year driver. I'm talking about years of experience. And the reason there's not much difference is people typically don't process driving. Have you ever driven somewhere and you arrived at your destination and it dawned on you that you have not been paying attention to anything over the drive? You were talking on the phone and listening to the radio or listening to a podcast, and you really didn't process. That'd be kind of a nerdy thing to do, wouldn't it? Pull off at a rest area and say, just give me a minute. I'm going to reflect on this last 100 miles. I want to be a better driver. But Dewey would say, if you want to be a better driver, that's exactly what you have to do. And so simply being in more classrooms doesn't really make us better classroom observers. We have to reflect on it, we have to process it, we have to think about it, not just in a rote sort of way, be there and spend the time inside classrooms. I still don't know if I understand this next quote, but I think it rings true. We don't see the world as it is, rather we see the world as we are. So let me just admit to this, and you can too if you choose to. When I go into a teacher's classroom, I don't see the classroom as it is. I see it through my eyes and through my experience. I see it through who I am, not who the teacher is. And if for 1 second I think that I'm seeing the whole picture, well, Nin would say that we're wrong. We always mightily warp the things that we see. You know, I think if, going back to the driving analogy, if you and a good friend were sitting side by side in your car, taking a trip, front seat, looking out the front window, you know, most people would say you took the same trip. But the truth is, if you and I were driving in a car together down the road, we'd both be looking out the front windshield, both be looking at the scenery, and we would see two different sets of things. We would actually have taken two trips. Have you ever been to a meeting at your central office, perhaps, with a group of other administrators, and after the meeting you talked to a colleague, and you thought to yourself, did you go to the same meeting that I went to? Because obviously you didn't hear what I heard. We don't go to meetings as they are, we go to meetings as we are. And that affects our experience. One of my best friends as a principal, Ernie Freeman, we were middle school principals across the street from one another. And so we would go to conferences together. And Ernie was an avid quail hunter. I didn't do much hunting or shooting or anything, but I was, I was an avid coffee drinker, okay? And so as we were driving down the road, Ernie would always see quail habitat. I mean, we'd be driving around, he goes, oh boy, I'll guarantee you there are 3 coveys of quail underneath that pin oak tree right over there by that field. And I didn't notice that, but here's what I could notice. I feel a Starbucks coming up, in the next couple of exits. We're in the same car, we're taking the same trip, but we see 2 completely different things. Have you ever looked at some of the research behind state teacher evaluation models? And when we try to develop this thing called inter-rater reliability, have you ever heard of that? Where we look at a video of a teacher in practice and we try to, score it and try to get a little less breadth around what everyone is seeing. Those studies show that there's no such thing as inter-rater reliability. We can watch a teacher on a video teach for 10 minutes and half the room wants to name him or her teacher of the universe and the other half wants to terminate their contract right on the spot. And it's not that one person's right or one person's wrong, it's that we observe classrooms and we think about teachers through our own minds. We really don't see with our eyes. We see with our mind. Your eyes they collect light, they impact the optic nerve, which has a broadband connection to something called your primary visual cortex. That's where you see. You see in your mind. You don't see with your eyes. That's why there are so many interesting visual tricks where you've seen these, where there's a bunch of people getting on an airplane and a gorilla runs behind them and nobody notices it because it's outside their field of view or outside their attention area. So a little intellectual humility and a little bit of wonder and awe, I think, is a good first principle as we think about classroom observations. Number two, it really helps to have a language to help you see important things in the classroom. I'd like to call this a pattern language. Again, back to the research on what differentiates a novice from an expert. Novices see over-contextualized things. Experts see bigger picture things. A good way of thinking about that is patterns. Experts see patterns, novices see individual acts, or sometimes disconnected chaos. My first year as a high school assistant principal, one of my mentors, Gerald Patterson, was principal at the high school where I was an AP. He was one of the best in the world at supervising a Friday night football game and predicting where trouble will break out in the stands or around the concession stand, which was a hot spot at our school. And I always wanted to be like him. I always said, Gerald, teach me how you can spot that stuff. Because he would just sense it and he would move over there and prevent the problem from happening, which is way more efficient than dealing with the problem after it happened. And he would there'd be little movements in the crowd, little things, and he would pick up on it and he'd say, we better go over that way. I remember one night, Friday night, I said, Gerald, let me try. And I was looking at the crowd. I said, there, right there. Let's move over there. That looks like trouble brewing. And he would be gentle with me, but he'd say, no, Mike, he goes, the lady just dropped her popcorn. That's it, right? That's not what's happening. So do you see the difference? I was a novice football game administrative supervisor. He was an expert. What's the difference? He could see patterns. He could look at the crowd, and there were things that he put together in a bigger picture. For me, I just saw unicorns. I saw single things that happened. That's one of the things we want to do with our observation is be more expert, see patterns. We see patterns more when we have names for them. If you can name something, you can spot it. Well, let me put it another way. If you don't have a name for something, it's hard to see it in the wild. The notion of having words like mental models or overt responses or chunking or goal clarity or congruence or performance feedback, where these things are words that help us to identify some of the patterns that we're seeing in the contextual field. I've always thought it would be fun to be a meteorologist, right? Gosh, they're on prime display now that we have this big thing coming up the East Coast, right? So everyone's predicting weather. I think some of you are going to be here in Florida longer than you thought, which is maybe not a bad thing, right? But you know, that's what a meteorologist does. When they look at the sky, they look at clouds. And an expert meteorologist sees patterns. A novice like me and maybe like you, we just see, I don't know, bunny rabbits, wheelbarrows, puffy rabbits. You know, that's what we see, individual clouds. But a meteorologist looks at that and says, those are individual clouds, but there's a pattern here. And if you know the pattern, you can predict what the weather is going to be into the future. That's what we mean by pattern recognition. I'm going to write a word up here on this flip chart. And I don't know. I'm going to estimate that maybe half of you will know what this word means, and the other half won't. So if you're in the second half where you don't know what the word means, don't feel bad. I've picked a pretty arcane word. So here it is. I'm going to write it and say it, and then I just want you to think to yourself, do I know what that word means? The word is gallimaufry. A gallimaufry. Now, I won't make you prove it, but just tell me, how many of you know what a gallimaufry is? Raise your hand if you know what a gallimaufry is. Okay, I underestimated. How many of you would say, Mike, I have advanced degrees in many areas, but sitting here today, I have to admit, I don't know what a gallimaufry is. Who's in that category? Okay, so is it too simple to say that there might be a gallimaufry near you right now, but you wouldn't know it. You wouldn't see it because you don't have a name for it. I have a picture of a gallimaufry. The definition of a gallimaufry is a hodgepodge. It's actually a collection of things that have no categories. I hope my wife doesn't mind that I took this picture of her desk about a week ago. And so this is a classic gallimaufry. It's a collection of things that make no sense, that have no categories. So there's a mask, there's a hairbrush, there's some Scotch tape, there's a ruler, there's an inhaler up there in the upper left-hand corner, a couple of notes, some things. That's a gallimaufry. I have one in my office, don't you? I have one in my car, don't you? Now here's my prediction, and hold me to this. You're going to see these in the next 24 hours. Because you know why? You have a name for it now. You know what a gallimaufry is. And you're going to go back to your room, and you're going to pack your bag to go back home tomorrow, and you're going to look at that thing, and you're going to say, darn, that's a gallimaufry. And it might have still been there. You may have still noticed it, but let me just go a step further and say, you are more likely now to spot gallimaufries in the wild because you know the word. You have a term for it. And when you have a word for it, you can see it. When you don't have a word for it, it's hard to recognize it. Allow me to break that word down. Recognize. Recognize. When you recognize something, you're not seeing it for the first time. You're seeing it for the second or third or fourth time. If I were to run into you in the airport going back tomorrow, and I would say, oh, I know you, you were at the SAM conference. I would never be able to do that if we hadn't already met. When I recognize you, I'm re-seeing you. I have to see you first before I can see you second. And so as an administrator in a classroom, if we're recognizing excellent instruction, it helps to have a language. It helps to have words that we can use so that we can see these patterns again and again and again. Administrators who can not only see one-off effective practices in a classroom, but who can put it together into some patterns are extra dangerous, I think, extra valuable for the teachers that they serve. The idea of a language, the linguist Lera Boroditsky has an amazing TED Talk. If you just Google Lera, L-E-R-A, Boroditsky, B-O-R-O-D-I-T-S-K-I, TED Talk. The name of her TED Talk is How Our Language Shapes Our Thinking. And she makes the case, and it's a beautiful presentation of information and data and images that, again, if you don't have a name for something, you can't see it. One of her more famous classic experiments was color vision. And what she did was she took a group like us, divided it right down the middle. Let's let this be the control group, and you're the experimental group. She then quizzed to see how many different color words each group knew. The average was about 17. So you know about 17 color words on average, and this side of the room knows about 17 color words on average. Then she took the experimental group, and she taught them 5 new colors and 5 new names that they had never known before for colors. Now this group has 22 color words in their vocabulary, and the control group has 17 color words in their vocabulary. And then she showed the subjects beautiful color pictures of things like a toucan's beak or a sunset over the Pacific Ocean, where there are lots of hues and rich colors. And she asked the control group, how many colors can you spot? Now, this is not a trick question. So if the control group on average knew 17 colors, how many colors could they spot in these amazing images? What's the number? 17, right. And this group could spot a few more because they had been taught. So then the fun part about this experiment is she took people from the control group one at a time, Paul, maybe you, and shared with you your 18th color. So she taught you a new color and its name that you'd never known existed. And then she had you look back at the original picture. Now, here's what the participants in the study said. They said, before I knew the word for the color, I couldn't see it. But as soon as I learned the color and its name, and I looked back at the toucan's beak, it was there. Now, follow me here carefully. The subjects didn't say it was there and I didn't know what to call it. Here's what they said. It wasn't there. And when I looked back with the name, it appeared. We don't see with our eyes. We see with our mind. We see with our language. And so one of the things we can do to be more valuable observers to teachers is not practice going into classrooms more, practice our language. Whatever language you're familiar with, use it. Hattie has a great language. Marzano has an amazing language. Charlotte Danielson's language is very rich. The Artisan teacher language that I work with a lot has some good utility. I don't think there's any value in being a purist. Speak as many languages as you can. In my family, I'm the only one that doesn't speak Spanish. My 4 children and my wife are fluent Spanish speakers. And if I could do one thing over in my life, it would be to learn a second language. Because I'm convinced, living with people who are dual language, that they have a richer life in many ways than I do. Because they have more words and phrases. There are some things that happen in life that Spanish just has a better phrase for it than English does, and vice versa. So if you're multilingual, what? You're really able to experience even more things. So developing a pattern language is important for classroom observation. Success principle. Forgiveness for that. Number 3 is called develop positive expectancy. So a lot of what I see when I walk into a classroom is controlled by what I expect to see when I walk into the classroom. And I think I'm a better observer when I remind myself of that. Mike, what's your state of mind? What is your expectations of this classroom? I sometimes find when I walk into a beginning or novice teacher's classroom or a teacher that has a reputation of not being quite as effective as some other teachers, I think sometimes that expectation colors my observation. I think it's very possible that sometimes that teacher might do something amazingly brilliant and I might miss it because I'm not expecting it. I also think that when I go into a teacher's classroom that has a bit of notoriety that everyone says is just one of the best teachers we've ever seen, that I probably let that influence my observations as well. There's this thing called positive expectancy. I know this is a little strange. You don't have to do this, but I would advise to do some version of it. I try to pause before I go in a classroom door and give myself a little pep talk about this. Mike, I say, this teacher's practice is going to contain some amazing cause and effect relationships. There are things to see here. There are things to learn here. There are things that would be valuable feedback to give this teacher. Don't miss them. Don't miss them. Expect them. Expect that you're going to have an aha. Expect that you're going to see something positive. Now, it doesn't always work, but our expectancy is important, isn't it? That's why when we go to a restaurant and we look online and it has a 4.5-star rating, we say, that sounds pretty good. And maybe when we visit the restaurant, maybe the food's only really average, but we still think it was better than average because we expected it to be. If someone introduces you to a friend and says, be ready, she is so funny. She just has the best sense of humor. You know what we're going to do? We're going to laugh at stuff she says, even if it's not a bit funny, because we've already been forewarned. This is a person, we have this positive expectancy. My father, Claude Rutherford, was an outdoorsman, grew up on a farm in southwestern Virginia. And as a boy, I'll never forget walks we would take through the woods. He just loved to do that. We'd just take several hours and just hike and walk. And he was so good at showing me all the natural wonders of the southwest Virginia forest. He would say, look at that. Do you see those deer tracks? Look at that sapling. That's where a deer rubbed his antlers to rub off the oh gosh, what's the stuff on deer's antlers called? Velvet, yes, yes. And I walked right past the tracks. I walked right past the sapling. I walked right past where he said turkeys had been scratching and looking for insects. He saw all those things. I walked right past all of them. Finally, I asked him, Dad, how do you see all this? I mean, I've got 20/20 vision. You wear glasses. I got to be able to see as much as you do, but I miss all that. And here's what he said. He said, I don't know. He goes, that's a good question. He goes, if I had to say, I think it's because I know they're there. And I know that if I walk in the woods for 10 minutes and don't see something beautiful and amazing, it's because I'm not paying attention. It's not because it's not there. That is positive expectancy, right? We see what we expect to see. That can be a principle for us as well. Hey, if you don't mind, let me ask you to pop back to your group, right? The same group you had. Let's just take a couple of minutes, and I just want you to process some of the principles that we've talked about so far, okay? So let's see. We're just going to do these first three. Number one, remember, was intellectual humility. We're going to share some ideas on that. Number two, developing a pattern language. And number three is having positive expectancy before we go into the classroom. Just a couple of minutes. I just want you to say, hey, which of those resonated well with me? And elaborate on those a little bit. Add some of your own intellectual capital to it. A couple of minutes, okay? Off you go. Thanks a lot, everyone. Find a good spot to interrupt. Say bye-bye to your group. Say, sounds to me like Mike's going to have us meet together maybe one more time. And so back to your seats. Thanks. Good work. We're working on principles, success principles of skillful classroom observation. And the next several principles that I'd like to share with you, we're going to go pretty quickly, and the reason we're going to go pretty quickly is they're pretty simple and straightforward. And they really have not so much to do with our philosophy and positioning, but actually some of the basic science of where to stand and what to look at and how long to look and where to go. And so the next several principles are, I would say, technical principles of effective classroom observation. Number 4. I have a bias towards this. I think we should basically, mostly, stay on our feet when we're observing classrooms. When you're on your feet, you're mobile. When you're on your feet, you have a better angle of vision at what's going on around the classroom. When you're on your feet, the blood is flowing to your brain more robustly. You're smarter. You're 3 to 5 IQ points smarter standing up than you are sitting down. When you sit down in a classroom, that means if you want to move or change, you have to move furniture to get up, and that sometimes can disrupt what's going on. There are a lot of reasons to stay on our feet in most classroom observations. Now, I think it's excellent practice, perhaps pre-pandemic, to sit down with students or to kneel next to them or to see exactly what they're doing and really get a good view of the nature of their work and how they're mastering and what they're doing. But then we pop right back up and mostly stay on our feet. It's just a more active position. It looks more like we're working. Observing a classroom, in my opinion, is just as hard as teaching a class. You've got to work hard at it, and every second counts. And so sometimes just simply remembering stay on your feet gives you some advantages in that way. Success principle number 5. Don't worry much about interrupting the action in a classroom. I know that as an observer, I often feel like I walk in and the teacher's right in the middle of something really important, and I say to myself, well, gosh, I hope I didn't interrupt that. I hope the students didn't lose their train of thought. I hope the teacher didn't lose his or her train of thought. I think almost always I worry too much about that. Here's what we know about you interrupting the action in the middle of an observation. You've already done it. And so the damage is done. Now, really the question is, what's going to be the payback for this interruption? How much information can I gather to pay the teacher and these students back for the interruption that I had? In physics, I used to teach high school chemistry and physics. It's called Heisenberg's uncertainty principle. And Heisenberg's principle says that anytime you observe anything in the universe, you change it. You cannot observe something without changing it. So let's just get used to this. Every classroom we observe is different because we're in there. It isn't the way it was before you walked in. And it isn't the way it will be when you leave. When an administrator is in a classroom, the teacher is different, the students are different, the temperature is different, the humidity is different, everything changes. So instead of I'm gonna stand back against the wall, I'm just gonna be a fly on the wall. I've said that to teachers so many times, I wish I hadn't. I'd say, hey, when I come in your classroom, just don't worry about me. I'm just gonna be a fly on the wall. Is that impossible? Right? Do you remember being a teacher and having your principal come in and observe you, and then you try to say to yourself, okay, don't panic. He's just a fly on the wall. She's just in here. I'm not supposed to worry about it. Heck no, I can't even remember my name when the principal walks in, much less what the lesson was that I'm teaching. So every time we go into a classroom, we interrupt it and we change it. Let's just honor that, and let's just work hard to make the information we gather worth the interruption. Success principle number 6. I think it's a good idea when we first walk into a classroom to stop ourselves from noticing details. The human mind wants to jump right into the work. Administrators are the most busy people in the whole food chain of education. So it feels like a break. But I think it's good practice that when we walk into a classroom, get a sense of the classroom's environment, get a sense of the climate, get a sense of the interaction patterns, get a sense of the energy, get a sense of by not looking at details, we can look at the big picture. Here's one thing we know about observations, about observing anything. There is a window of opportunity to see the big picture. And whenever we enter an environment, that window closes in a minute or two. And after a minute or two, we are a part of that classroom environment. But the window is open for just a little bit of time. My son Bennett works for Bank of America. Bank of America's headquarters is in Charlotte, where I live. The executive vice president, several layers up from Bennett when he got his first job, called him in on the 3rd day he worked there and said, Bennett, welcome to the team. He said, every Friday at 10 o'clock for the next 6 weeks, I want you to come to my office. And I want you to tell me what you're noticing about our team and our bank and our organization and how it runs. Now, don't take this the wrong way, Bennett, he said, but after 6 weeks, I don't want to see you anymore. But I want to take advantage of the fact that you're a newcomer. And right now, the window is open, and you're going to be able to see things about the culture of our organization that I can't see because I've worked here for 30 years. And that makes you valuable. What he was saying, I think, is that when we go into a classroom, take advantage of that first 90 seconds. We're not a part of the action yet. We're an interloper. And in that position, we can see things that will close. The opportunity to see them will close in just a moment. So don't go with details first. Try your best to, see the big picture. Sample the environment of the classroom as well. Success principle number 7. Enter the classroom as a visitor and not an owner. So if you're a principal, you've got keys, right? You can go in any classroom, anytime. It's your domain. It's your right. Teachers spend more time in their classrooms than any other place on earth, save perhaps their home. And it's a little bit of sacred ground. They put their blood, sweat, and tears into that classroom. They spend hours in that classroom. That classroom is where they put a few pictures of their family. That classroom is where they spend hours and hours and burn hundreds and hundreds of calories. So metaphorically, I think it's really respectful and it's a good idea that when we enter a classroom, we should take our shoes off, metaphorically, right? It's sacred ground. One of the things that I think is a nice touch is to avoid hanging out in the teacher's personal area. You know, it's interesting, isn't it? Teacher desks are endangered species. There are not nearly as many of them as there used to be. Many teachers say, I don't want a desk anymore. But even in classrooms where there is no teacher's desk, there's still a spot where the teacher puts his or her lunch, or puts a couple of pictures of their family, or pays the water bill when they have a break. It's a nice touch, I think, to steer clear of that area. That's the teacher's personal area, and this classroom is the teacher's domain. They put a lot of work into it. So not to claim our right, not to say I can go anywhere I want to, anytime I want to. I think it's even a nice touch sometimes as we enter a classroom to even interact with the teacher, if that wouldn't disrupt, and say, I'd like to spend a few minutes. Is now an okay time? I suppose we ought to think ahead and think to ourselves, what if the teacher says, no, it's actually not a good time at all? Well, we can make that up when we get there, right? But asking permission, entering the classroom as a visitor and not an owner, is just a little bit of respect. All right, success principle 8. Whenever an administrator is in a classroom, the teacher sneaks a peek at you every 20 seconds. Every 20 seconds. Now, they act like they're busy teaching, but every 20 seconds or so, they check you out. Where are you? What are you doing? And when they do their 20-second check-in, here's what they see. The nonverbal communication that you're showing the teacher about your presence in their classroom. We can't really talk to the teacher while the teacher's teaching. That would be inappropriate. So it's all nonverbal communication. So if you're observing me and you're on this side of the classroom and I'm teaching, and I'm just going to sneak a peek at you, Mark. And when I sneak that peek, it's just a second and a half. Here's what I'm looking for. Are you engaged? Are you with it? Are you excited to be here? Are you paying attention? Are you focused? Are you maintaining intensity? Are you working just as hard at observing me as I am at teaching my classroom? Now, that's a lot of questions to answer in 1.5 seconds, but teachers are good at doing it. And they're going to check back in 20 seconds and check back in 20 seconds. So I think it's a good practice for us to just anticipate that and say, when I'm in a classroom observing, that teacher is going to look at my nonverbal language and make a quick check-in. And when the teacher looks, I want to be focused and intense and doing my job. Maybe a smile. Try not to look like you're having gas pains. That's a good idea. But just know that that's something that's going to happen. Maintain that level of focus and intensity. Success principle 9. When we're in the classroom, this is a little bit of an optical tip, if you will. Observe both field and ground. Field means big picture. Ground means details. A camera with a telephoto lens is good at zooming in on the ground, showing the details. A wide-angle lens allows a team picture, allows you to see the big picture. I know this is pretty specific, but I would say that if I was going to be in a classroom for 15 minutes, instead of observing the classroom for 15 minutes, I might see that as an opportunity to cycle through field and ground 3 times. So big picture, notice the gestalt of the classroom, then pick something and go to ground. Maybe it's a couple of students working on the assignment the teacher has given. And then ignore the rest of the classroom and see what you can learn for 90 seconds, just engaged with that one specific part. Then go back to field and look around and spot the whole class, and then pick another ground, go to ground again. If we take 15 minutes and simply stay in one place and observe, versus 15 minutes and we see it as 3 rounds of field, ground, field, ground, field, ground, we're going to have more information. Most novice observers, there are video studies of this, most novice observers, me and you, when we're not thinking about it, position themselves about 8 feet from what they're looking at. So 8 feet, you know, I don't know. About that far, from here to the end of the podium. 8 feet, as it turns out, is a pretty horrible focal length. It's too far away to see the details of what's happening, and it's too close to see how what's happening is affecting the system around it. So instead of staying 8 feet away from things, I think we do well to stay far away from them and cycle with up close, telephoto, wide angle, telephoto. We can arm ourselves with even more information and be more valuable to teachers in that way. Principle 10. Sometimes we can really discover some interesting nuggets in a classroom if we train ourselves to look off the action. Look ahead of the action, look behind the action. The human brain is conditioned to follow action, to follow movement. So when we first walk into a classroom and the teacher is talking, what do we normally do? Start listening. Or if the teacher is drawing something on the whiteboard, we watch the teacher draw the thing on the whiteboard. Or if the teacher is circulating throughout the classroom, we watch the teacher interact with this table and then interact with this table. We can gather even more information if we train ourselves sometimes to look off the action, ahead of it, and behind it. If the teacher is circulating through the classroom and visiting this table and then this table, instead of watching the teacher go to the third table, watch how the students at the second table respond when the teacher moves away. Maybe even more interesting would be to watch this table who's still 2 tables away of the teacher. That's an example of not always following the action, but sometimes looking behind it, sometimes looking ahead of it. We can gather more information and be more valuable to teachers in that way. One more. I know in the thing it said 10. I thought I'd give you 11, so you'd, think I over-delivered. Practice shorter, more frequent observations. I'm not talking about your state's particular teacher evaluation expectations. We're not talking about teacher evaluation today. We're talking about observing for growth and for development, not for assessment. Too late in the day to go into this. I know you already know it. Teacher evaluation is notoriously low effect size. It's actually hard to find the effect size of teacher evaluation. Now, that doesn't mean we shouldn't do a good job at it. It's a touchy subject, and if we don't do it well and fairly and transparently, we get ourselves in big trouble, deservedly so. But let's not fool ourselves into thinking that being great at teacher evaluation is the same as being great at teacher development. So we should, when we're not evaluating, probably go into classrooms more often for fewer minutes. When we ask teachers, hey, do you get much feedback at your school? What about your administrators? Do they hang out in the office or do they come and see you on a regular basis? When they answer that question, interestingly, they don't count minutes. They count touches. So when a teacher says, I actually get a lot of feedback from administrators, what the teacher's responding to is, my administrators were in my classroom 4 or 5 times over the last couple of weeks. Now, they weren't in there for 30 minutes. In fact, a couple of times they were only in there for 90 seconds or 2 or 3 minutes. But just a very short visit to a classroom to a teacher feels like an episode of connection between them and you, and between them and the instructional mission of the school. I think it's an oversimplification, of course, but our job, and I've always felt a kinship to Sam's, because it's the Sam's mission too, is to learn as leaders how to create the conditions at a school that attract and retain and develop skillful teachers. Part of those conditions involve our skillfulness in how we start the process, by how we enter classrooms and how we gather information, our skillfulness as observers. Hey, thanks a lot for the great engagement. Thanks for hanging in there this afternoon as well. I have, let's see, there's some contact information. at RLG Mike. There are 2 PDF files there where you can get all the information we talked about today if you wanted to get that in print. I would invite you to, we have something called notes. 3 types: Artisan teacher notes, feedback and coaching notes, leadership notes. It's free. If you subscribe, you get about every 10 days or so a podcast or a PDF file, something of value, we hope. We also promise that we won't send you other stuff, just the resources that are there. As always, it's been a pleasure. Mark, thank you for the kind invitation to work with your group again, and thanks for the good work you do. And you guys have a wonderful rest of your conference. Yes, thank you. Thanks very much.